There's a quiet kind of misery that intelligent people often carry, a restlessness they can't explain. It doesn't scream, it doesn't collapse, it thinks, it asks, why am I here? What does this mean? What should I do with my life? And when no answer arrives, it tries harder. More books, more theories, more analysis, as if life were a puzzle, and with enough effort, it could be solved. But Søren Kierkegaard, the father of existentialism, saw straight through this illusion. He didn't believe life was a riddle to be solved. He believed it was a paradox to be lived. He wrote, "Life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced." And in that one line, he dismantled the entire modern obsession with understanding everything before we dare to live. The more you try to solve life, the more paralyzed you become. Because life isn't neat, it isn't logical, it doesn't unfold like a math equation. It contradicts itself. It defies reason. It demands something else, not intellect, but existence. The modern mind is addicted to control. We want certainty before commitment. We want clarity before action. We want a risk-free roadmap before we take a single step forward. But Kierkegaard warns us that mindset is poison because it keeps you stuck in your head, living in theories, trapped in endless preparation for a life you're too scared to actually live. He called this the aesthetic life. It's a life of ideas, abstractions, stimulation, but no grounding, no purpose, no real choice. It feels deep, but it's shallow. It feels alive, but it's hollow. Because you're always observing, but never becoming. You start curating your life like a philosopher curates thoughts, endlessly comparing, refining, analyzing, but not choosing, not committing, not risking. And this is where suffering grows. Because a life without commitment, without direction, feels free at first. But over time, it becomes unbearable. Why? Because you start to drift. And as you drift, you begin to feel the very thing you were trying to avoid, meaninglessness. This is what Kierkegaard feared most, not death, not suffering, not pain, but the soul that slowly dissolves into nothingness because it refused to live. You see, the attempt to solve life before living it is, ironically, the surest way to lose it. You become the man who knows all the paths but walks none, who talks about purpose but feels none, who critiques meaning but never makes any. And what's worse, you can feel smart while doing it. But deep down, your soul knows. It knows that life isn't waiting for the perfect explanation. It's waiting for you to show up, not with a plan, but with presence, not with mastery, but with honesty. And this is where Kierkegaard confronts us with a brutal truth. If you want to live, really live, you must stop trying to understand everything. You must trade certainty for commitment, trade knowing for becoming, trade solving for experiencing. Because clarity doesn't come first, it comes after the leap. The smarter you are, the more likely you are to fall into the trap Kierkegaard warned about. Because the reflective mind is a double-edged sword. It gives you the ability to see patterns, to question beliefs, to explore infinite options. But that same gift can paralyze you. You see every possible outcome, so you hesitate. You detect every contradiction, so you mistrust. You hear every inner voice, so you drown in noise. And eventually, the energy that could have fueled your transformation gets stuck in mental loops. Kierkegaard called this state double-mindedness. It's when a person splits into two selves, one who dreams and one who delays, one who desires and one who doubts, one who reaches and one who retreats. This isn't laziness, it's inner conflict. It's what happens when a man refuses to make a leap because he's still trying to find perfect logic for an illogical existence. But life isn't logical. It's messy, painful, emotional, sacred, absurd. And the attempt to make it purely rational, to reduce it to formulas, doctrines, systems, isn't wisdom. It's fear. Fear of pain. Fear of failure. Fear of commitment. Kierkegaard observed that most people, especially the intelligent ones, use thought not to understand life but to avoid it. They build palaces of theory to hide from the demands of reality. They craft complex philosophies to justify their paralysis. But underneath it all is the same aching truth. They are afraid to live, because living requires loss. It requires risk. It requires leaping into the unknown without a net made of certainty. And for the reflective mind, that's terrifying. Because thinking feels like control, but it's not. Thinking without action is a hall of mirrors. You just keep meeting your own hesitation in different disguises. And Kierkegaard warns, if you live like this too long, it becomes your default state. You begin to idolize ambiguity. You begin to fear decisions. You begin to think that inaction is wisdom, but it's not. It's cowardice dressed in intellect. He calls it the sickness unto death, a despair that hides in comfort, in cleverness, in endless analysis. And slowly, your life becomes a ghost of what it could have been. So what's the way out? Kierkegaard doesn't offer a 5-step plan. He doesn't hand you a strategy. He gives you something much harder, a challenge, to choose, not when it makes sense, but because it doesn't. To leap, not because you've calculated the landing, but because the ground you're standing on is already collapsing. To act, not in the absence of fear, but through it. Because the only way out of double-mindedness is commitment. Commitment to a direction, to a purpose, to a self you haven't fully become yet, but can no longer avoid. And here's the paradox. Once you leap, the ground appears. Once you act, clarity follows. Once you choose, the confusion loses its grip, but only after the leap, never before. Kierkegaard's most famous idea, the leap of faith, has been misunderstood for generations. It's not about blind religious belief. It's not about ignoring reason or abandoning thought. It's about what happens when reason reaches its limit, and you choose to live anyway. Because the truth is this, there comes a point where thinking can't save you, where no amount of logic, philosophy, or analysis will give you the answer you're looking for. That's the threshold where most people retreat. But Kierkegaard says that's exactly where life begins. You can think and still feel lost. You can plan for years and still be afraid. You can know every reason to act and still do nothing. Because at the core of existence, there's always uncertainty. And the only way through it is a leap, not a leap into nothingness, but a leap into authenticity. The leap of faith means saying, I don't have all the answers. I don't know what will happen next, but I refuse to live paralyzed by uncertainty. It's the moment you stop demanding guarantees from life and start participating in it. And this leap isn't just about religion or spirituality. It applies to everything that matters: love, purpose, vocation, article, identity. You can't solve these things. You can only live them. And living them requires something terrifying in the modern age: faith. Not in dogma, but in experience. In your own capacity to grow, to endure, to evolve. In something deeper than logic. Your existential will. But here's the paradox. This leap looks like weakness to the unawakened. It looks irrational, emotional, risky. Because it is. It's the opposite of control. It's radical vulnerability. But in that vulnerability, something sacred happens. You become real. You stop hiding behind thought. You stop outsourcing your decisions to logic. You stop waiting for perfect conditions to begin. And instead, you act. You live, fully, imperfectly, honestly. Kierkegaard believed this is what separates the aesthetic life from the ethical life. The aesthetic man is always observing, never committing. Always choosing novelty, never depth. Always distracted, never grounded. The ethical man makes a choice and becomes someone. He chooses direction over comfort, responsibility over ease, existence over entertainment. And in doing so, he gains what the aesthetic man never can: meaning. Because meaning is not something you find, it's something you generate through commitment. The leap of faith is the turning point. It's the fire that burns away indecision. It's the moment you step into life without needing it to make sense first. And that leap, it's not a one-time event. It's a practice, a discipline, a stance. Every time you choose to act in the face of doubt, you're making the leap. Every time you choose depth over distraction, you're making the leap. Every time you say yes to your becoming, despite fear, confusion, or pain, you're living Kierkegaard's philosophy. Because the point isn't to solve life, it's to trust it, to risk yourself in it, to suffer with it, to grow through it. And that trust, that's what makes you untouchable, not because you're invincible, but because you're real. Kierkegaard didn't romanticize the leap. He didn't pretend that choosing to live with authenticity was easy or beautiful. He called it what it was, agony. To become yourself is to suffer, because it means confronting the lies you've built your identity on. It means letting go of the roles, the masks, the comforts that made you feel safe, but kept you small. He wrote, "The most painful state of being is remembering the future, particularly the one you'll never have." That's the pain of the unrealized self. And most people, when they feel that pain, run. They run into distraction, into status, into logic, into busyness. But Kierkegaard's call is clear. Don't run, descend. Descend into the mess of your own contradictions. Face the dread, face the doubt, face the self you've been avoiding. Because that's where truth begins. Jung would later call this the process of individuation, the integration of the self. Nietzsche would describe it as becoming who you are. But Kierkegaard said it first. You must become a subject, not an observer, not a thinker, a subject. Someone who acts, who chooses, who suffers, who becomes. And that transformation doesn't happen through intellectual breakthroughs. It happens through despair. Why despair? Because despair is the moment you realize you cannot think your way out. It's the collapse of all illusions. It's the death of the false self. And in that collapse, something else is born, the courage to begin. When you stop trying to control life and start experiencing it, your suffering doesn't vanish, but it becomes meaningful. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What am I being called to become through this?" That's the existential shift. That's the fire that refines instead of destroys. And here's what most people miss. Despair is not failure. It's initiation. It's the rite of passage between existing and living. If you feel lost, it's not a sign you've gone wrong. It's a sign you're finally outside the cage. The question is, will you go back or will you go through? Because on the other side of that, suffering is something rare. Not happiness, not success, but truth. A life that's yours, not copied, not inherited, not borrowed from books or influencers or spiritual gurus, yours. But you'll never reach it if you keep trying to outthink life. You reach it by surrendering to the process, not passive surrender, active surrender, where you feel the fear and leap anyway, where you feel the doubt and still decide, where you feel the chaos and still take responsibility. And in that surrender, you find something stronger than answers. You find faith, not in a system or belief, but in yourself. Not your ego, not your intellect, but the self that's trying to emerge through your suffering. That's Kierkegaard's gift. He doesn't tell you what to believe. He tells you how to live, with risk, with passion, with pain, with honesty, and most of all, with choice. Because no matter how complex life feels, no matter how overwhelming the uncertainty, one truth remains. You can choose. And that choice, that leap, is the beginning of everything. In the end, Kierkegaard offers no escape, no tidy solution, no ultimate certainty. What he gives you instead is responsibility. Responsibility to become, not to reach perfection, not to conquer fear, but to show up to your life, to your choices, to your becoming. He writes, The thing is to find a truth which is true for me, to find the idea for which I am willing to live and die. That's what it means to be a subject. That's what it means to live, to stop running from the unknown and walk into it, to stop demanding certainty and dare to act without it, to stop trying to solve life and start experiencing it. Because life is not a riddle. It's not a code to be cracked or a philosophy to be mastered. It's a question, and you are the answer in motion. You're not meant to know everything. You're meant to move, to stumble, to try, to fail, to grow. And through that movement, you don't find the meaning of life. You generate it. You build it through your commitments. You carve it through your sacrifices. You ignite it with your faith. Not faith in a system, not faith in a God, unless that's your path, but faith in this, that you are capable of facing life honestly and not breaking. Because most people are not broken by life. They're broken by their refusal to live it. They spend years circling themselves, building mental traps, rehearsing a version of life they're too afraid to perform. And so they shrink. They shrink into safety, into analysis, into surface-level pleasures. But the man who leaps, he expands. Not because he's fearless, but because he understands. Fear is not a stop sign. It's a doorway. Kierkegaard's entire philosophy can be boiled down to this. Don't wait for the perfect reason to live. Live, and the reasons will come. You will never think your way to courage. You will never plan your way into meaning. You will never argue yourself into purpose. You must leap. You must say yes to your life, not the idea of it, not the curated version of it, the messy, raw, uncertain reality of it. And when you do, something sacred happens. Not a reward, not a happy ending, but a new beginning. You stop being a spectator and become a participant. You stop asking, what is the meaning of life? And start asking, what meaning am I willing to fight for? That shift changes everything, because now life is not something you fear. It's something you meet, face to face, risk to risk, breath by breath. You stop demanding answers and start becoming one. So if you're lost, good. If you're uncertain, perfect. If you're terrified to leap, that's exactly where you're supposed to be. The ground beneath you is not going to get more stable. The future's not going to become more clear. And the life you dream of will not walk up and introduce itself. You must begin. Begin clumsily, begin painfully, but begin before your mind convinces you not to. Because in the end, the man who waits for life to make sense dies before he ever lived. But the man who leaps, who risks, who chooses, who lives the question, he becomes something the world desperately needs, alive.